You're all very welcome to the Small Practice Information Session 81, in fact, and we're here with Rory O'Neill from the Law Society, who's an investigating accountant at the Regulation Department. And today we're going to be discussing mitigating the risk of cyber attack. As per usual, we'll take the questions over the chat if possible, and we'll be recording a session and sending it out at the end of the week for everyone. So you're very welcome, Rory. Thanks for coming and joining us today.
Thank you very much, Justin, and thank you all for attending, and hopefully you'll get something out of the talk itself. As you just mentioned there is an increased threat of cyber attacks, and unfortunately it will be an ever-present threat. So the Law Society have approached it during the pandemic, the lockdown. There was a significant increase in the number of attacks upon the profession, and the Law Society reacted. We set up a working group. There were members of the technology committee joined us, myself and another member on the regulation department, and other members in practice, including people from the regulation of practice committee. And we investigated how would be the best approach to tackle the issue and to help mitigate the threat. And to be honest, the answer all comes down to really the education of not only the profession, not just solicitors, but also the support staff within the practice, and also your clients as well. So it's an all-encompassing approach. We're trying to reach everybody who's involved in a legal transaction, and in that way, that if everybody is aware of the best processes, procedures to put in place that will help mitigate the risk, hopefully that will stop a successful attack upon your practice. The chance of stopping an attack is quite low. Very, very often, a practice will be attacked. The question is, will it be a successful attack, or will you stop it from actually getting through? So that's what I'd like to talk to you all about today, and hopefully we can address some of those issues. And as I mentioned, the pandemic there, obviously during the lockdown, people moved from working in the offices where everybody was on the technology within your office. You had IT support staff or even employees looking after your IT, and all they had responsibility for was for your network within your four walls. Once the pandemic came and we moved to remote working, it brought about a whole host of new challenges. See, people were using their own devices from home in a lot of cases, and also they're using their own Wi-Fi broadband systems. So these brought about their own risks, and it's something that all practices, even going forward, if we are implementing a hybrid system, that you have to take into account that these bring additional risks of a successful cyber attack. And it's something that you really need to try to secure through your IT people, maybe implementing your own devices for your staff to use at home, and making sure that their own broadband is a secure broadband with passwords, etc. in place. Because as you're aware, when they're working at home, they're still connecting to your servers, they're still accessing the data on your client's personal data, etc. And often emails are being transferred back and forth. So it's very important to ensure that all that is done securely, particularly over VPNs, to make sure it's secure. And, one of the things we did find, and hopefully it's mitigated now as people are more used to working from home, but certainly the big change at the outset when people just went from being in an office, having procedures in place to follow, to now working from home. And often some of those procedures weren't followed, and they resulted in successful attacks. And more specifically there, I suppose I'm talking about cases where client monies were transferred to fraudulent bank accounts. And the staff who would normally do it would carry out a number of checks. But because they were now working from home and the change, those checks weren't carried out, and unfortunately money was transferred to the fraudulent accounts. So that's one of the main reasons for all the increase in the threat. Apart from obviously the more and more technology advances, the easier it is for people to carry out attacks. I also anecdotally heard from a guard that they found that a number of organized criminals, particularly drug dealers, etc., because they found it so difficult during the pandemic, they actually moved their crime business to cyber, and that also resulted in an increase. There's studies to back up. The Grant Thornton study was out last year, showed that there was a 50% increase in cybercrime in 2020. Smith and Williamson produced an annual law survey every year, and every year it reports an increase in attacks and an increase in the risk. So as I mentioned, the Law Society set up the working group. We're focusing on the education of, as I said, the profession, support staff and clients, but also they're going to try and engage with the Banking Federation of Ireland, which hopefully put other processes in place to help mitigate the risk. And I can discuss them a little bit further with you. I'm not going to spend long today because it's a short talk, so I won't spend long on the types of attacks. But I think at this stage, most people will be aware of the interception of emails, and then the fraudsters are changing either your client account details or your client's bank account details. So if you're sending money to a client, they send you an email with their bank account details, and those details are compromised, they're changed, and you send the money to the wrong account. We have had reports of six-figure sums being transferred to fraudulent accounts. As I say, during the pandemic, some checks maybe not being followed, but a lot of them, not only, some people feel that an email that comes from outside the firm is more at risk of being intercepted. But even in that case, for example, it was an email from the accounts staff to the financial controller, was intercepted and the account details changed, and the money was sent to the fraudulent account by the financial controller, believing that the email that they received from their accounts assistant obviously had to be fine, no problems. The accounts assistant had double checked that the money was there to be transferred, the account details were correct, checked them with the client, so everything was perfect up to that point. And then they emailed the financial controller to say, go ahead and transfer this money, and that's where it was intercepted. Thankfully, in that case, the bank actually identified that something looked suspicious, and they contacted them, and they recovered the vast majority of that money, thankfully. And the quicker that you do notify the bank that there's something suspicious, the better the chance is that you recover the money. So they're the main type of attacks in relation to monies, client monies that we're seeing. There have been other attacks in relation to when you click on a link, they're sending you to a fraudulent bank account website. So it looks very much like your online banking, but it's actually fraudulent. So we'll speak a little bit about that as well. And the other type I'd like to speak about just at the very end for the last few minutes would be in relation to ransomware. We all know about the HSE attack last year. It's something that does affect the profession. We're not 100% on how many attacks there are because the profession don't actually report it to us. And there's no requirement on any solicitor to report an attack to the Law Society. However, if money is missing, it's often the case that the insurers will ask them to report it to the Law Society. So we do find out more when money is missing. However, ransomware attacks where you can't access your data, there's no need, no requirement for solicitors to report it. So some do, but we believe many don't. And that we believe that there's a lot more attacks out there than we're aware of. All of these attacks start with a phishing email. I think at this stage, again, you know, we're all aware of phishing, vishing, mishing. There's many terms between if it's by email, by phone, by text. All of the attacks on the profession, the ransomware and this monetary attacks all start out with a phishing email. It's either by clicking on an attachment, and we've seen one recently where a respected counsel, a senior counsel, I think it was, or a barrister, they didn't send an email, but an email was sent from their account with an attachment on it that appeared to be proceedings, and they were looking for you to review them. And thankfully, many of the solicitors notified us. You know, we haven't had dealings with that barrister or counsel for a while. This is a bit strange. But if you double clicked on the attachment, it would install malware onto your machine that would give the fraudsters the access into your emails, etc. So then they can target, when they're reading your emails, they'll target a financial transaction, and then they will try and compromise the bank account details. So how do you protect against that? As I said, overall has to be a holistic approach. There's numerous inputs into it. First of all is technology. And I think it's a little bit foolish for everybody to just think, when we talk about cybersecurity, that the answer to cybersecurity is technology and, you know, just improving our systems. That is not going to protect against all attacks, but it is a large proportion of your mitigating possibilities. You also need to train all your staff from the top level down to every single user of your system. That could be an outsourced bookkeeper, it could be IT staff, they mightn't be staff employees, they might be outsourced, and they come in occasionally to update your systems, etc. Through your support staff, your admin staff, and your assistant solicitors, consultants, etc. So all staff, all users of your system need to be trained and aware of all the difficulties that can present themselves. And then as well, just the processes that you have in place within the practice. You need to have it on your agenda. Cybersecurity, every month thinking, is there a new, is there anything we need to do now? Are we aware of any sort of attacks? What happens if we will be attacked? What will we do? And, you know, what are our vulnerabilities? How much data are we storing, particularly in relation to our clients? And you know, having a look and even asking your IT people to look at it and say, where are our vulnerabilities, and tackle them then on an ongoing basis. So just to briefly start with your technology itself, speaks for itself, but making sure that your software is 100% up to date. Microsoft 7, if anybody uses Windows 7 at the moment, it's no longer supported by Microsoft. So if there are any loopholes within that system, and they are obviously discovered as technology increases, and that Microsoft won't update your systems for it if it's Windows 7 or before. So you will have to update your operating system to Windows 8, Windows 10, etc. So obviously, if you are updating at the most recent, it will last the longest. And that goes for all your systems, all your software that you use. Just make sure they're all up to date. And where possible, particularly in relation to your emails, is to implement multi-factor authentication. And many of you will know it from, say, using even your personal banking or your Gmail accounts, email accounts, that when you log in, your phone will get a notification that you're trying to log in, and you'll have to tap something on your phone. So it does mean if a fraudster tries to get access into your email system, you'll be sent a message that you'll have to respond to in order to grant the access. So they won't be able to gain access that way. So it's a very important step, and you can speak to your IT people about it, of just protecting your systems there by implementing the multi-factor authentication. One other thing I will always say is these phishing emails always look genuine. At the very, very brief look of the email, when you open it first, it appears genuine. It's always within the details that you'll actually see that it's not coming from who it's purported to come from. So I would always recommend that you spend just a few seconds. It's all it takes. Open the email. You will see at the top, the header across the top of your email, you will see all the details of who sent it. And if it is coming from a fraudster, often either the name is slightly out or it's just slightly different than what you'd expect. And just think, would I be expecting an email from this person now at this time? As I say, the email from counsel, the vast majority of people, solicitors identified, I don't have a case with them at the moment, so I shouldn't be getting anything from them. But you might well have a case ongoing, or it might appear to be coming from a client, and you click on it. So just always think before you open it. And if you're a little bit skeptical of whether it is a genuine email or not, contact the sender through other means. Don't just respond to the email. Don't ring from a phone number on the email. Contact them elsewhere. As I mentioned already, training all your staff and making sure that your staff, particularly now working from home and remotely, they only have access to the areas that they need to have access to. So all your admin staff, even your assistant solicitors, don't need to be looking at the accounts details, etc. So you can give different authorities to different staff members so they only access the stuff that they need to access. And that we speak about creating a strong password. Now, I will always say, you know, to use a passphrase. My advice, and many of you may have heard me say it before, rather than using a password, use a passphrase. And mine is that you take your favorite song, your favorite prayer, your favorite poem, whatever it might be that you'll know the words of, take the first line, change a couple of the letters around, use a few different symbols or numbers in it, something that you'll always remember. And if you do have to change, if your system requires you to change regularly, and if English, there is two trains of thought on whether you should change regularly or leave it. But even if you do have to change regularly, you can use the second line of the poem or the song, whichever it is, and you'll always know what your passphrase is then. It won't be too hard to remember. But also in relation to that then is using the multi-factor authentication, using biometrics as we see with phones. You can use your Face ID or Thumb ID, etc. So you can use that on your systems as well. And then, as I said, having a risk management policy, making sure that it's on your agenda, that you're thinking about it at all times, what you need to do, and having a plan put in place, a disaster recovery plan. We all probably have one in case of fire or anything like that. This is another one. What do we do if we are attacked? And my advice is always, particularly if there's, well, obviously if there is money involved, the first person to contact is your bank. And the reason for that is that the sooner you notify them that a transfer of money from your account to another account may be fraudulent, they will contact the other bank and they will freeze the money in that account until you can prove that it is fraudulent. They won't send it back straight away, but they will freeze it so the fraudsters can't get their hands on it. So they're the first people to contact. After that, we would say get onto your Gardaí. In both cases, I would highly recommend that you do the legwork now and you find out who within your bank or within the Gardaí you should be reporting any such fraud to. So rather than ringing your, now the Gardaí, it's just going to be, they're kind of opposite to each other. In the bank, you'd probably ring your relationship manager in the local branch that you have your account with. Whereas with the Gardaí, they want you to go to the local station rather than to the fraud squad. And I think most people will probably start looking up, trying to, you know, the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, how do I get in touch with them? Where do I report this? They will send you back to your local station. So find out the number and who within there you can speak to. So you have the number listed. If anything happens, you can ring them straight away. Then as soon as straight after that, onto your IT providers and get them in, have a look at your system, interrogate it, particularly on your email systems. Have a look just to make sure, obviously to clean it, but they often put these rules within the system. So any email that comes to Rory O'Neill will be forwarded onto this fraudster's email address, and they can sit there and read all the emails and identify which ones then have a financial transaction that they can actually target. And after that, you'll have to consider reporting it to the insurers, to the Law Society, and also if you have a reporting obligation to the Data Protection Commission, if there is data compromised belonging to your clients, etc. Finally, I'd just also like to say on that whether to consider a cybercrime insurance policy. A loss of money where the solicitor has sent money to a fraudulent bank account will be recoverable under your general terms and conditions of your professional indemnity insurance. You'll obviously have to pay the excess, but you will be able to make a claim for it. At present, and Justin, I believe you have O'Leary's on next week on the insurance side, and it might be something to ask them to discuss as well. Just from the other side, from if your client sends the money thinking they're sending it to you, because they received an email from you saying, here's our client account details, but it actually goes to a fraudulent bank account. I think at the present, the insurers are covering it, but my own opinion is they won't be doing that for too much longer if they can see a way out of covering it, because it's not money within your control. You've never actually had control of the client's monies. So I could see there might be a loophole for them to get out of it. And that would leave your clients at a complete loss. You won't be at a loss because you didn't actually control the money at any point, but your clients will send in, say, to purchase a house, and they could send in maybe the deposit, maybe they might get caught for the full amount. They send it to the wrong account and it's not recovered, and they'll have to take the hit. So maybe it's something the insurers can help out on that as well. So consider the cyber policy itself. And then what I would just say, the technology committee, it's going back a few years, they created these 10 steps on how best to protect yourself. I'd just like to spend a few minutes on them. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's all right. And hopefully
should be able to do that.
Everybody can see that?
Yep.
Great. So these are the 10 steps, and it hasn't changed too much since. The advice is still the same, but the ones that I'd just like to highlight, and really if anybody takes anything out of today, I'm sure everybody sends in an email or tells their clients that they won't send their client account details by email to them. My advice to you is, at the very outset of a case, to tell your clients that you won't send the details by email, but hand them a one-page with your client account details on it. I would suggest you print it off on a different color page than your normal white A4 page. If you print it off on green or blue, whichever, and tell them to hold it until they need to transfer money. And when they need to transfer it, they refer to that. I would also tell them that a solicitor's practice is forbidden from holding a bank account, a client bank account, outside of the jurisdiction. The vast majority of these frauds, and I'd say over 95% of them, ask for the money to be transferred to a bank account either in England or further afield, normally within Europe or Eastern Europe, etc. Rather, not very often it go further afield than that, but most of the money leaves the jurisdiction. If your client is told our account must be within Ireland, if you receive an email with client account details, A, it didn't come from us because here's the page with our account details, and B, never ever send money outside of the state. And if that doesn't happen, that will stop most of the attacks from the point of view of your client sending money to you. Also then, from the other side of it is, if you're receiving money from your client, so you're sending the email. Sorry, my screen has frozen, Dustin. Sorry, I was just, there we are. If you receive the email from your client, and you see it in bold there, they send you in their account details and you're sending out, say it might be a probate matter where you're sending out a bequest, or it might be a personal injury, maybe even a sale where you're sending out the balance monies to your client, and they send you in the IBAN and the BIC of their account. Always, always, always make sure that the person who is actually setting up the electronic transfer on the online banking system are the ones that verify those account details. As I mentioned to you already, there have been a number of attacks where the internal emails, maybe the solicitor verifies it with their client and then emails their account section to do the actual transfer. And it's those emails that are getting intercepted. So make sure it's that person. But ideally, again, you shouldn't be relying on account details received by email. You should be asking your client at the outset to hand over a copy of the top of their bank statement as proof of their address ID as part of your AML. You get a copy of their passport and you get a copy of the top of their bank statement with their account details on it. And that does the address ID instead of a utility bill. So they're just a couple of things. Also, just very quickly in relation to probates, one piece of advice I do give is ask the executor to collate all the bank account details for you. Instead of you contacting beneficiaries and them often being in different jurisdictions and emailing it over, ask your executor to do it, to have it printed out for you and for them to hand deliver it to you. So you're working off a hard copy, and hopefully then it will prevent any of those type of attacks. So the only other thing I just wanted to quickly speak to you about, I'll stop sharing that there.
And Rory, we're just coming up to 25 past, so not to interrupt you, but there are a few questions I'd love to cover. So
sure, yeah. No, the only other, and very, very briefly, just I said I'd speak about ransomware. Look, in ransomware, I hope everybody knows, if you back up daily, make sure you're backing up off-site, and most importantly, make sure the integrity of your backup is working. So we've come across cases where people thought they were backing up every single day and thought everything was fine, and when they went to restore the backup, they realized it hadn't been working. So do a test run on bringing a few files down, make sure it's running, or your IT people will do it for you. So that's really, in relation to ransomware, that will stop an attack if you have a backup from last night, being able to restore it all down. There will be an interruption to your day, but at least it won't require you to pay any money over to the criminals. So that's it. Sorry, Justin.
No, you're all right. I know it's a very short window. So
yeah.
So just a quick question there. Is there a professional obligation to report a cyber attack breach to either the Law Society, PI insurers? They're aware there's an obligation to report a data breach to the DPC, which is the Data Protection
Commission.
Commissioner.
There's not, to be honest, there's not. The Law Society, we would like everybody to report it to us. We're fully aware that many aren't reporting it. The insurers are asking that where there's a theft of money, that it is reported to the Law Society. And I think they kind of want, in some cases, for the society to confirm it is a cyber attack and there's no other regulatory issues there before they pay out on a claim on the insurance. So obviously you'll have to report it to your insurers if it's a loss that you're making a claim for. I don't know if you have an obligation. Again, it'll be one for next week. Justin, if there's a loss or if it's a cyber attack where there's no money missing and you feel you can deal with it in-house and you don't make a claim, I don't think you'd have an obligation to report it. But certainly from the Law Society point of view, we would request that people report it, even on a anonymous basis. There's a form on the website at the moment. The website is going to be done up as part of this working group that was done. But the more we know of attacks, obviously the better the advice we can give to the rest of the profession to try and prevent further attacks. So
okay, there was a question there, just an observation, I think, more. And if anyone has a question just in the last minute or two, we'll take them now, that the policies have gone up. Probably one for next that have gone from 1,500 to 3,500 to cover 10K or 100K. So that's a change.
I had heard that in one other case as well, and similar figures reported that it had gone up. The solicitor had spoken to a number of colleagues in the area, and none of their premiums had gone up. And he couldn't understand it because he hadn't put in a claim or anything, but his seemed to have gone up. So it might be that the insurers are starting, obviously there are greater risks and they might start trying to push the prices up.
Just put a link up there to the cybersecurity page. So that's where you can report a breach of security. So there's also a question there, does the technology or the Law Society Technology Committee, have they approved a form of general client advisory notice that could be shared with all clients at the start of a transaction? So is there a protocol in place? It's
one of the recommendations of the working group, and hopefully it will be put in place soon. It's a very good idea, which is we did discuss and said there should be something there. So hopefully that will be produced.
Watch this space, I suppose. Just one query I had around impersonation. If I'm a solicitor and my account has been breached, and I don't know anything about it, and then they send requests to a client, and the client then sends me the money. Is it my obligation? Am I covered by this? Or
That's why I believe that the insurers at the moment are covering it, because in all the cases that we are aware of that it was covered, it was a case that the solicitor's practice and solicitors' IT systems that were compromised, and the money was then sent, the email was sent from the solicitor's IT system. So the attack would not have occurred if it hadn't been for the IT system being compromised. So for that reason, I think at the moment, the insurers are covering it, where the client has sent the money. Going forward, whether they'll look for a get out, as that participant mentioned, the premiums are going up. They will, if it's not that going up, they'll look to reduce the amount of payouts. So hopefully they will continue to cover them. If the client's IT system is compromised and they send money to a fraudster as a result of an email that seems to come from the solicitor or whatever, but the solicitor system isn't compromised, I don't think your insurance would cover it at all. I think that purely falls on the client, that they'd have to take the hit. But
yeah. So we're just coming to the end of the session, Rory. So thanks for taking the time. So I suppose in summary, like, you really need to have a formal policy in place to sort of assess the risks and threats of the business and have it documented. And then how do you respond to an attack, and have some sort of formal policy in place, and definitely backing up your system every night. Sounds like a really good policy. I think reducing the number of downloads that you make, clicking on attachments unwittingly, you need to be really careful around that, and just understanding that you have a response plan. I think they were the sort of highlights of what I took out of today. So thanks very much. We've got Brian O'Mara from O'Leary Insurance is going to join us next week and talking about what insurers require legal firms to do. And then CIS Controls on the 16th of March are going to how to secure your legal firm from an IT technology perspective. So we hope you'll join us for those future sessions. So Rory O'Neill, any final thoughts for us today?
I think you summed up very well there, Justin. You've summed up the talk very quickly. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Hopefully you'll all join us again next week. Slán agus Garamagad. Thanks, Rory.
Slán.